make the game controller, we don't need to have a sprite. We're simply going to the Objects folder, right-click, select Create Object, and we're going to name this obj_game controller, right? And we can already hit OK. And before we write any code to it, let's go to our game room here. In the Objects tab, we're going to select the game controller, and we're going to click here on the top left. Okay, you're going to see a blue circle with a red question mark. It's just because it doesn't have any sprite. It doesn't contain any sprite, so it works like that. Still, you need to have it in your room for whatever code you write in the game controller runs. Okay, so we're going to open the game controller, and what we're going to do here is we're going to add two events. We're going to click Add Event and select Create, and we're going to click on Add Event and select Step and Step. Okay, so the two important events. Let's go to Control here, and we're going to drag and execute code, and we're going to add a few variables here. So what I'm going to type here is Apple timer equals to 0, and then Apple underscore duration equals to, let me see, 25. Yeah, let's use 25. What are those things? The Apple timer is a variable. This is an instance variable. Okay, if you want to make any instant variables, you just have to type any name you want and make an assignment that this is going to work on GameMaker. Okay, and can be accessed on other code blocks of this same object. And the Apple timer is going to count how many frames have passed, and when it reaches 0, we're going to spawn an apple. And the duration is what time this timer is going to reset to. Okay, so for example, if the timer reaches 0, then we're going to spawn an apple, and the timer is going to reset to 25, to the duration that we store here. Okay, and that time is counted in frames. This is not in seconds. We could use seconds as well, but to keep things simple, we're going to use a frame count. And since our game runs at 60 frames a second, they should be around one apple each half a second, so 2 apples per second, more or less. We can change this later. Okay, let's use 20. Okay, 3 apples a second. All right, so now that we have that, we can go to the game controller. And on step, let's drag another piece of code here. What we're going to do is Apple underscore timer minus minus. And what happened here? When you type Apple underscore timer minus minus, you are typing Apple underscore timer equals to Apple underscore timer minus 1. You are getting whatever is in Apple timer and subtracting 1 and saving it to Apple timer. So if Apple timer is 5, then you're going to assign to the Apple timer 5 minus 1, which is 4. After that, it will be 4 minus 1, which is 3. 3 minus 1, which is 2. And then 1, and then 0, and when it reaches 0, we spawn an apple. And to abbreviate all that things, we can just type Apple underscore timer minus minus. Alright? Now let's check if, I'm going to make an if block here, if Apple underscore timer is lesser. Let's actually type if Apple underscore timer equals, and we use 2 equal signs this time. If it equals to 0, then first of all, Apple underscore timer equals to Apple underscore duration. So the timer resets. And after that, we can instantiate an apple. So how do we instantiate an apple? We need to type instance underscore create. This is a function. Okay. However, differently than the other function that we called, this one you have to set arguments. So if you look down here, you're going to see the signature of this method. You have to set x, y, and obj. Okay, so you have to set these 3 things here. X and y are going to be coordinates, and obj is going to be the object which you're going to instantiate. So what are the coordinates? What can be the coordinates of the apples here? We have to write a few things down. So let's go to the game room here where we have our apples, and we need to more or less figure out what is the minimum and maximum position of each apple. So let's take a look here. Okay, so let's say the maximum y for the apple, the one in the top, is going to be 32. Okay, actually the minimum is going to be 32, so it leaves the apples are going to vertically spawn from here, and the maximum one is going to be 256. Okay, So the apples vertically can be spawned from here, 32, to here, 256. Okay, let's go to the game controller. Let's open this piece of code. Now we have to set x, y, and the object. Okay, so let's make a local variable here to make that calculation for us. So to make a local variable, you're going to use var, okay, and let's use apple underscore y is going to be then something. That something is going to be, let me go back here. So the minimum is 32 and the maximum is 356. Okay, so we go to apple, actually game controller, and this is going to be 32. And how do we get a number that can range from 32 to 256? You can use the irandom function. Whatever number you put here, okay, inside that irandom function, this is going to evaluate as a number between 0 to 100. So it could be 5, 10, 100, of course, it could be 76, for example. But what we're going to put here is 256 minus 32, okay, because we start with 32. The minimum number that could be here is 0. So if that number is 0, we reach our minimum position, which is 32. The maximum number that can come out from this is 356 minus 32. And if this is the number that comes out, we have plus 32, and then we have minus 32. They cancel each other, and we're left with 256. So we use this simple math to have a number between 32 and 256. Okay? Now let's see about the horizontal position. We're going to grab this apple and check this out. So let's say the minimum is 192 and the maximum is 640. So let's go back to the controller, and we're going to put here var apple underscore x is going to be 192 plus, let me check again because I have a terrible memory today, 192 to 640. Okay, so 192 random 640 minus 192. Okay, so we store a random position in x and y for the apple, and here on instance underscore create we're going to put apple underscore x as the first argument, apple underscore y as the second argument, and finally obj underscore apple as the last argument. Okay, so you're going to make an instance of an apple object. Okay, so let's try this out. Let's see how this is going to work. And also let's delete these apples that we added here in the tree. Let's right click and delete them, and let's see how this is going to look like. We click now on run the game, wait for the code to compile, see if we made any mistakes. And there we go, we have a window here, player, and let's see if the apples start to appear. Apparently they are not appearing right now. So let's check out what could be happening. Let's go to the game controller, we're going to the create event. So we have apple underscore timer equals to 0, apple underscore timer, apple underscore duration equals to 20. Okay, so let's go back to the script here and step apple underscore timer minus minus. If it is 0, oh, actually there is one tiny problem here. Since apple starts as 0, since I set apple timer to start as 0 and we use minus minus, apple timer becomes minus 1. Okay, so things like that could happen if you use if you don't make this logic with if it's not frame based, if it is time based, these things can happen. So you can just come here and change it for lesser or equal than 0. So if apple underscore timer is lesser or equal than 0, then we're going to spawn that. Okay, so in that specific case we reached a loop where apples wouldn't spawn. Okay, so now we have some apples spawning. All right, so we have made a very simple logic, and now that we see this running, it is a bit unfair when we have some apples falling too close to the ground here. So this is what I told you about. You have to manually check how the game is looking, and you're going to tune these variables. So for instance, this apple y here, 256, is too close to the ground, so we can check another thing here. So let me add another apple, and let's make it come from here, so 192. Okay, we can come here to the game controller, we open this tab, and we're going to change this to 192. Okay, So we're essentially going to keep testing our game to see how this is going to look like. Alright, so in the next video we're going to learn how to add a very simple interface here where we're going to type collect the apples, and after that we're going to keep track of the score. Alright, see you in the next lesson. Adding an interface is very simple. We're going to the fonts folder. Let's right click on it and select create font. And the font by default is chosen as Arial, so let's use that. We're going to use fnt_Arial. We're going to set the size to be 18, should work fine for this game, and use bold just so it's easier to read. And now that we have that font, we can go to the game controller and add a new event here. Let's click on add event, draw, and then draw GUI. GUI stands for graphical user interface. So let's drag a piece of code. Let's add a title here, so draw text. And we're going to set a few things here. So let's start by draw_set_font. This is a function which receives one argument. That argument is going to be fnt_Arial. Okay, and notice that since we defined that font, it becomes red. So if you type something wrong, it would stay, the font would be white. Okay, so if you write it right, it's going to be red. And also, if you don't remember the name of something, you can just type fnt_ and wait for the code to show you some autocomplete suggestions. The same thing works for objects. So if you type obj_ and press Ctrl space or wait, you're going to see some suggestions here. It's one of the good things of following a pattern, a good practice. Now let's use draw_set_color, and we're going to use the white color, and there is a constant for that color. You can just type C_white. Okay, and finally we're going to use draw_text. The position for this, it receives 3 arguments. Okay, you have the X, the Y position, and the text itself. We're going to use 4 and 4 for X and Y. And for the text, you have to add between quotes. Let's type here collect the apples. Okay, so let's try this out. We're going to click on run the game to wait for the code to run. Let's wait just a little bit, and after the code is ready, we have a text here that says collect the apples. Now, what if we want to count how many apples we collected? Okay, how do we do this? Let's go to the player this time. We're going to open the player object, and we're going to the piece of code where we collide with an apple. Okay, here we just destroyed the apple, but when we collect the apple, we want to increase a score count. And GameMaker conveniently packs all the objects with an access with a single score count. Okay, there's a score variable which is global and everyone can access. And I'm just going to use here score ++. Okay, so every time the player touches an apple, the score increases. Okay, let's go to the game controller now, back to our draw text piece of code, and we want to add the player score here. How do we do this? Let's add a new line. We're going to add a hashtag to this string, and we're going to add score, colon, we give a space, and we're going to append this to another string because we want to add a score to this string. In certain programming languages, if you type the score here, this would work fine, but score is a number, and you have to specifically transform that number into a string, okay, so it becomes a text. So, for example, if the score was 5, this would look like this, and this is not going to work. This append doesn't work. You can append a number to a string. You have to turn that number into a string, like this. Okay, so you have to turn that score into a string. And to do this, you can use a string function. Okay, so it's going to look like this. You enclose the score variable in a string function. Okay, so the final line looks like this. You draw text on 4, 4, collect the apples, and then you break the line. You're going to type here score, and then you append the score. Okay, let's give this a try. We're going to click here to run the game. Let's wait for it to run. And after a window opens, you should be able to see the score. Okay, score is 0, and when we collect the apples, the score increases. Okay, so we have a nice scoring logic going on. Now what we have to do is we have to make a timer let's say give 20 seconds or maybe 10 seconds for the players to play the game, and after this time passes, then we're going to stop the game and put the score and tell that the player can restart it. Okay, we're going to see this in the next video.